Chapter 1. The Quiet Morning at St. Aldwyn's Parish. The morning mist hung low over the village of Briarwood, curling like pale ribbons across the cobbled lanes and drifting lazily between the hedgerows. It was the sort of dawn that made everything look softer, gentler, touched by a muted glow. Birds were still only beginning to stir. The world felt tender, half awake. St. Aldwyn's Parish stood at the centre of it all, an old stone church wrapped in ivy, its bell tower rising modestly above the rooftops. Its courtyard smelled of dew-dampened grass and faint wood smoke from nearby chimneys. The vicarage next door was a small, warm-looking house with lace curtains and a vegetable patch kept with proud care. Inside, Mrs. Eleanor Pritchard, the vicar's wife, moved quietly between the kitchen and the front room, setting out a tray of warm scones and lemon curd. She was a woman known for her hospitality, her soft voice, and the knitted shawl she wore even in warm months. She believed a home should always smell of something freshly baked, and the parish children often agreed, especially when they found reasons to wander close at tea time. But today Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she folded a cloth napkin. She paused, staring at the tray, before letting out a slow breath. "There's no use worrying before anything actually happens," she murmured to herself, though her tone betrayed little confidence. On the table beside her sat a small envelope, cream-coloured, unmarked, sealed with a faint smudge of ink. She had found it slipped through the vicarage door at dawn. No stamp, no handwriting, nothing but the weight of something ominous inside. A single sheet, 8 typed words. "Meet me beneath Briarwood Footbridge at first light." She had read the message 3 times, and each time the unease in her stomach knotted further. She had considered waking her husband, Reverend Thomas Pritchard, but he had returned late the night before, exhausted after visiting an ill parishioner miles away. Eleanor couldn't bear to burden him again, not when he'd scarcely slept. Still, the note lay there like a stone on her conscience. The kitchen clock ticked with steady indifference. It had been years since Eleanor had received anything secretive. The village, for all its quirks and gossip, rarely played host to true mysteries. Disagreements over hedge trimming and the occasional lost sheep, yes. Anonymous letters summoning her at dawn, never. Her fingers hovered over the envelope again. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. Perhaps someone needed help. Perhaps... A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Miss Jane Marple framed in the open kitchen door, her cheeks touched pink by the morning air, her sensible hat slightly askew from the breeze. She carried a basket of fresh herbs and a polite smile that, as always, held far more intelligence than most observers realized at first glance. "Oh, Mrs. Pritchard," Miss Marple said gently, stepping inside. "I do hope I'm not intruding. Your dear husband mentioned you were collecting rosemary for your luncheon, and since my garden is overflowing, I thought I might bring you some before the day grows too warm." Eleanor blinked, startled, then relieved. Miss Marple had a peculiar habit of appearing exactly when one needed her, often before one knew they did. "You're never intruding," Eleanor said, forcing a smile. "Your herbs are always welcome." But Miss Marple was already studying her face. Not rudely, just perceptively. Her eyes, pale blue and sharp as a sparrow's, missed very little. "My dear," she said after a moment, "you look quite unsettled. Is something the matter?" Eleanor hesitated. The envelope on the table felt like it grew larger by the second. I received something strange this morning, she finally confessed. I don't know what to make of it. Miss Marple set down her basket and moved closer, her voice softening. Would you like to show me? For a long moment, Eleanor remained still, torn between anxiety and the instinctive trust Miss Marple seemed to inspire in nearly everyone she met. Then she silently handed her the note. Miss Marple unfolded the paper. Her eyes swept over the 8 words. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture tightened ever so slightly. She murmured thoughtfully, folding the paper again. Anonymous, typed, and delivered by hand. That suggests urgency, or secrecy, or someone avoiding the chance of recognition. Eleanor clasped her hands together. Should I go? I don't even know who it's from. And yet, Miss Marple said calmly, you were considering it. Eleanor looked down, embarrassed. It felt wrong to ignore it. What if someone is in trouble? What if they needed me? Miss Marple nodded gently. You have a kind heart, Mrs. Pritchard. It is both your greatest strength and the very thing someone might take advantage of. A gust of wind rattled the window. The church bell clanged faintly in the distance. Miss Marple rose, touched Eleanor's arm, and spoke in a firmer tone. If you intend to go to Briarwood Footbridge, you mustn't go alone. Eleanor swallowed nervously. Would you accompany me? Miss Marple gave a reassuring smile. Of course. And so, as the morning haze deepened and the village stirred awake, 2 figures stepped onto the winding path that led through the woods toward the old footbridge, unaware that what awaited them there would mark the beginning of one of Briarwood's most chilling mysteries. Chapter 2. Beneath the Briarwood Footbridge. The path to Briarwood Footbridge wound gently through the trees, a narrow trail trodden smooth by years of village footsteps. Wildflowers nodded along the edges, and the sound of water grew steadily louder as Miss Marple and Mrs. Pritchard walked side by side. The morning mist, which at day seemed almost charming in the village, now felt thicker beneath the canopy, hanging low between branches like ghostly veils. The air here was cooler, laced with the scent of damp earth and moss. Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I've never come this way so early, she said quietly. It feels different somehow. Places often do at unfamiliar hours, Miss Marple replied. Much like people, I suppose. One sees what is usually hidden. They walked in silence for a few moments more, the chirping of unseen birds, the only sound besides the crunch of gravel beneath their shoes. Ahead, the outline of the footbridge began to emerge. A simple wooden structure arched over the stream that split the woods in 2. Briarwood Footbridge had always been a familiar landmark. Children played near it in summer, dangling their feet in the cool water. Couples walked here in the evenings. The vicar had blessed it once after a storm, when part of the railing had given way and needed repair. And yet, as they drew closer, something about it felt wrong. Do you see? Miss Marple murmured softly. Eleanor squinted, her eyes adjusting to the shifting light. At first she saw only the dark curve of the wood, glistening faintly with residual moisture. Then she noticed it. A shape at the far side of the bridge, crumpled near the bank, half shielded by the tall reeds. She stopped short. Is that... Miss Marple did not answer. Her eyes were sharp, all softness gone now. She quickened her pace, though still with the measured caution of someone who had long learned that surprises were rarely pleasant in such settings. As they reached the bridge, Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. A body lay at the base of the embankment, one arm sprawled awkwardly across the stones where the ground sloped toward the stream. A dark overcoat, rumpled and damp at the hem, clung to the still form. The face was turned partly away, but the hair, streaked with grey, neatly cut, was unmistakable. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "Thomas!" she whispered hoarsely. "Oh, merciful heavens! Thomas!" She started forward, but Miss Marple's hand gripped her arm with surprising strength. "Wait," she said quietly. "Just a moment, Mrs. Pritchard." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, spilling over. "That's my husband. I have to—" "And you shall," Miss Marple said, her voice steady but compassionate. "But if he needs the doctor, we must know it. And if he does not, then we must be careful not to disturb anything that may help us understand what happened." The words were gentle, but the implication was chilling. Eleanor trembled, torn between horror and hope. Miss Marple stepped forward first, her shoes sinking slightly into the soft ground near the bank. She moved with deliberate care, her gaze cataloguing the scene, the angle of the body, the way the coat bunched at the shoulders, the placement of the feet. One shoe partly submerged where the water lapped at the stones. She knelt beside the figure, her knees protesting faintly as she lowered herself down. With a small, apologetic murmur, more habit than necessity, she reached 2 fingers toward the man's neck, just below the jawline. No pulse. The skin felt cool. Miss Marple closed her eyes briefly, a quiet sigh passing her lips. "I'm so very sorry, Mrs. Pritchard," she said softly. "I'm afraid your husband has passed away." The world seemed to tilt. Eleanor swayed where she stood, one hand gripping the bridge railing, as though it were the only thing anchoring her to the earth. Her breath came in short, uneven gasps. "No," she whispered. "No, he was fine last night. Tired, but fine. He couldn't just—" Her words dissolved into a shaky sob. She pressed a handkerchief to her mouth to stifle the rising wail, her shoulders shaking. Miss Marple did not attempt to offer meaningless comforts. She stayed beside the body, her gaze thoughtful now, weighing, assessing. "The doctor will need to confirm it, of course," she said gently, "and the police must be informed at once. But before anyone else arrives—" She spoke almost to herself as she looked around. The ground was disturbed in places, footprints, some clear, some muddled. The path from the bridge to the bank had several overlapping impressions. Miss Marple noted the tread pattern, different sizes, different depths. At least 2 people had been here recently, possibly 3. The railing on the bridge nearest the body bore a faint smear. Miss Marple stepped closer, peering at it. It was dark. Perhaps mud, or perhaps something else. She did not touch it. The vicar's right hand lay open, palm upward, as if reaching for something that wasn't there. His left arm was crooked beneath him, the sleeve damp from the water. His collar was slightly askew, his tie loosened in a way that suggested haste or struggle. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. This did not look like a man who had simply slipped. "Mrs. Pritchard," she said quietly, "did your husband often walk this way so early in the morning?" Eleanor swiped at her tears, fighting to steady her voice. No, he prefers to have his breakfast first. He says the parish comes to him, in due time, and he has no need to roam about at dawn like the milk cart." Her attempt at a weak smile faltered almost immediately. "Then his being here," Miss Marple said carefully, "at this particular time, is unusual. Eleanor's gaze fell to the body, then to the bridge, then slowly to Miss Marple. "The letter," she whispered. "The letter was for me, but what if it was meant for him all along?" Miss Marple looked at her steadily. "Did he see it?" "I don't know," she said faintly. "I left it on the table when I went to make tea. He was in his study when I rose. It's possible he came in and read it. I didn't hear him. Oh, dear Lord." Her knees buckled and she sank heavily onto the bridge step. "If he thought someone needed help," she whispered, half to herself, "he would have gone. He always does. Always." Miss Marple placed a firm but comforting hand on her shoulder. "That is the mark of a good man," she said. "But it may also mean someone knew him well enough to rely on that goodness." A far-off sound broke through the quiet, distant voices on the path, the faint clink of a bicycle chain. Early deliveries, perhaps. Soon others would be about. The scene would no longer be theirs alone. "We must go back to the village at once," Miss Marple said. "We'll send for the police and the doctor. The sooner they arrive, the better. The longer this place remains undisturbed, the more truth it may yet tell us." Eleanor stared helplessly at her husband's still form. "I can't just leave him here," she whispered. Miss Marple's eyes softened. "We aren't abandoning him, my dear. We are ensuring that whoever did this—" She paused, as if weighing whether it was too soon to phrase it that way, then continued with quiet resolve. "Is not allowed to do it again." The word "whoever" hung in the air like a chill. Not whatever, not however. Whoever. Eleanor swallowed hard. "You think this wasn't an accident?" Miss Marple rose slowly, bracing herself on the bridge rail. Her gaze drifted over the footprints again, the smear on the railing, the unnatural twist of the vicar's shoulders. "I've seen many accidents in my time," she said softly, "and I've seen many things that were made to look like accidents. This—" she glanced at the body with a mix of sadness and keen awareness— "does not quite feel like the former." She turned to Eleanor, her voice gentle but unwavering. "Come, we must go back. You need to sit and have tea, and someone must fetch the constable. I shall speak with him myself." Reluctantly, Eleanor allowed herself to be led away, pausing one last time at the edge of the bridge to look back. The vicar's body lay motionless by the water, framed by reeds and mist, as though the whole scene had been quietly staged in the early morning light. As they walked, the village sounds grew closer once more. The bark of a dog, the distant clatter of a cart, the bells of St. Aldwyn's chiming the passing of another quarter hour. Life in Briarwood moved forward, unaware that everything had already changed. Miss Marple, her expression thoughtful, held the anonymous note in her gloved hand. 8 words. A dead vicar, a footbridge in the mist, and somewhere in the village, someone who knew precisely what would happen when that envelope slipped under the vicarage door. Listener, moment. Before we move on, tell me in the comments, do you think the letter was meant for Eleanor, or was it always meant to lure the vicar here? Your theories might just match Miss Marple's, or outsmart her. Chapter 3. The village stirs with whispers. The return journey to Briarwood felt longer, heavier. Eleanor leaned on Miss Marple's arm, her steps unsteady on the winding path. The mist had begun to lift in pale, drifting shreds, revealing the quiet outlines of cottages and gardens waking to the morning. But the peaceful charm of the village seemed strangely hollow now, as if a thin film of cold had settled over everything, unnoticed by those beginning their daily routines. Near the green, the milkman, Alfred Greaves, was unloading bottles from his cart. At the sight of the two women, he brightened and tipped his cap. But the expression faltered almost at once when he noticed Eleanor's pallor. "Mrs. Pritchard? Miss Marple? Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice taking on a nervous edge. "You both look as though you've seen a ghost." Eleanor opened her mouth, but no words came. Miss Marple stepped in gently. "We've had a difficult morning, Alfred. Please fetch Constable Harrington immediately. Tell him it's urgent." Alfred's face drained of colour. "Urgent? Is someone hurt?" "Just do as Miss Marple says," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling. The milkman needed no further explanation. He hitched his horse and rode off, with a speed quite unlike his usual leisurely pace. Miss Marple guided Eleanor towards the vicarage. Each step seemed to sap more of the poor woman's strength. By the time they reached the front door, Eleanor was shaking. Inside, the stillness of the home felt jarring. The smell of the scones she had baked earlier still lingered, warm and sweet, a cruel contrast to the cold reality outside. Eleanor sank into her armchair, clutching the armrests as if she feared she might fall apart. "He was just here," she whispered. "Only an hour ago he was alive in this very house." Miss Marple poured a glass of water from the jug on the counter and brought it to her. "Drink this, my dear." Slowly. Eleanor obeyed, her hands trembling. A single tear slipped down her cheek, splashing onto her shawl. Miss Marple sat beside her, her expression composed, yet deeply compassionate. "Eleanor," she began gently, "you must tell me something, and I'm afraid it may be painful." Eleanor nodded faintly. "Ask. When you found the letter, was your husband awake?" Eleanor closed her eyes, thinking back. I believe so. I heard him moving about in his study, rustling papers, but I didn't speak to him. I thought he was preparing his sermon." "Did he usually check the post in the mornings?" "Yes," she whispered. "He always did." Miss Marple's fingers tightened slightly around the note she still held. "Then it's quite possible he saw this before you did." A shiver passed through Eleanor. But why would someone send such a message to him? Who would possibly wish to meet him in secret at dawn? Mrs. Marple didn't answer at once. She glanced around the room, at the meticulously arranged furniture, the framed photographs of parish events, the orderly shelves of hymnals and well-worn books. A man like Reverend Thomas Pritchard was beloved by most. But beloved men sometimes carried burdens no one else knew. "We mustn't jump to conclusions," Miss Marple said at last. "But anonymous notes are seldom used for pleasant purposes." A knock at the door cut through the room like a sudden gust of wind. Miss Marple rose. Eleanor looked up, startled. Standing on the vicarage step was Constable Harold Harrington, tall, sandy-haired, and perpetually flustered. Behind him hovered Dr. Lionel Trent, the village's longtime physician, his medical bag in hand. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Pritchard," the constable said, removing his cap with uncharacteristic solemnity. "Alfred said it was an emergency. What's happened?" Miss Marple stepped aside. "Constable, Dr. Trent, I'm afraid there's been a most dreadful occurrence. Reverend Pritchard has been found dead at Briarwood Footbridge." The constable exhaled sharply, as if struck. Dr. Trent's eyes widened behind his spectacles. "Good heavens," Dr. Trent murmured. "Tom Pritchard? Dead? But that's impossible. I saw him 2 days ago. He was in perfectly good health." Constable Harrington straightened, trying to assume authority, despite the evident shock. "We must go there at once," he said. "Dr. Trent will confirm the cause. Miss Marple." He hesitated. "Did you see the body?" "I did," she said, "and I believe he has been dead for no more than an hour." "And the circumstances?" Harrington asked carefully. Miss Marple held up the anonymous note. "Unusual." The constable frowned. Dr. Trent leaned closer, examining the paper. "A typed note," he muttered. "No handwriting." "And delivered by hand," Miss Marple added. "Likely at dawn." She tucked the note away. "When you go to the footbridge," she said, "please be cautious not to disturb the ground near the embankment. There are footprints. Several, in fact." Constable Harrington paled. "Footprints? You believe this might be foul play?" Eleanor let out a small cry, pressing both hands to her mouth. Miss Marple's tone remained steady, composed. "We cannot say for certain yet. That is what you must determine." A tense silence settled in the room. Finally, Harrington straightened his shoulders. "I'll head there immediately. Dr. Trent with me." The doctor nodded, still stunned. "Eleanor," he said gently, "I'll return as soon as I've examined him." They left at once, the door closing behind them with a soft thud. The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating. Eleanor looked at Miss Marple with fear-shadowed eyes. What will they find? Miss Marple considered her answer for a moment. "That," she said quietly, "depends on what the killer, if there is one, intended us to see." Eleanor shivered. Miss Marple rose and walked to the window, peering towards the village green. Several neighbours were out now. Mrs. Henley with her dog, young Michael Pennington kicking a football, Mr. Dudley sweeping his shop's doorstep, all blissfully unaware. But that would not last long. For in a village like Briarwood, news travelled faster than the wind. Word of the vicar's death would be everywhere within the hour, growing, twisting, gathering speculation. And among the whispers, Miss Marple knew, would be one voice that spoke too quickly, too defensively, or not at all, the one who had lured Reverend Pritchard to the footbridge, the one who had been waiting for him. Listen a moment. Who do you suspect first? The anonymous letter writer? Someone from the parish? Someone close to the vicar? Drop your guesses. Miss Marple may be listening. Chapter 4. Whispers over tea and troubled hearts. The minutes after the constable and doctor left passed slowly, each one pressing heavier on Eleanor's fragile composure. Miss Marple remained close, quietly tidying the tea things on the kitchen table. Not out of necessity, but out of gentle understanding that the familiar movement might soothe the trembling silence. Eleanor stared blankly ahead, fingers wound tightly together in her lap. "Everything feels unreal," she whispered finally, "as if I'll wake and find him in his study, humming over his sermon notes." Miss Marple placed a cup of warm tea in front of her. "Drink what you can, my dear. Shock is a strange companion. It makes the world blur at the edges." Eleanor managed a small sip, then another. "Thank you, Jane. Truly." Miss Marple settled into the chair opposite her. "There is no need for thanks. Your husband was a good man. The village will feel this deeply." Eleanor blinked back tears. "He tried so hard. People confided in him about everything, more than they ever told me. Sometimes I wondered whether being a vicar meant carrying secrets no one else should bear." Miss Marple's interest sharpened just slightly. "Did anything trouble him recently?" A pause. Eleanor's expression shifted. Not quite guilt, but hesitation, as though she had already said more than she intended. He was quieter these past few weeks, she admitted slowly. Sometimes distracted. When I asked, he brushed it off as parish matters. A marital dispute here, a wayward son there. Nothing unusual, he said. Did you believe him? Another pause. No, she whispered. Before Miss Marple could speak further, the vicarage door flew open without ceremony, a rare discourtesy in Briarwood. Mrs. Judith Henley, the vicarage's closest neighbour, swept in with her terrier, tugging at its lead. "Eleanor!" she cried dramatically, pressing a hand to her bosom. "My dear, I've just heard the most dreadful rumour, that Thomas has been seen by the footbridge, and that he—" She broke off, glancing at Miss Marple, who sat calmly observing her. Judith lowered her voice to a strained whisper. "That he has died. Tell me it isn't true." Eleanor's breath caught. She lowered her gaze. Judith gasped. "Oh, my poor dear, I can't believe it. Not Tom Pritchard. Such a gentle soul." Her dog barked sharply, as if echoing her disbelief. Miss Marple spoke gently. "The doctor is with him now, Judith. We must refrain from assumptions until he returns." Judith nodded hastily, already dabbing at her eyes. Yes, of course. But people are talking already." The butcher told the baker, who told Mrs. Linfield, who nearly fainted. "And you know how this village is. They're saying, well, that he slipped, or that he was meeting someone." Her eyes darted meaningfully toward Eleanor. Eleanor stiffened. "Meeting someone? Whatever do they mean?" Judith shifted uncomfortably. "There are always whispers, dear. You know how people are. Especially since he's been visiting Mrs. Dalrymple quite often these days." Eleanor froze. A tremor went through her hand, almost shattering the teacup she held. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "Mrs. Dalrymple?" she asked casually, though nothing in her tone was accidental. Judith nodded eagerly, grateful for an audience. "Yes, the widow on Rosebank Lane. Pretty thing, younger than most, and ever in need of counsel. Tom was with her only last week. I saw him. Twice, in fact." Eleanor's voice shook. "He never mentioned that." "Well," Judith said, with the dramatic sorrow of someone who rather enjoyed being the bearer of grave news. "Perhaps he didn't wish to trouble you. A vicar's duty is demanding." Miss Marple quietly noted every word, every gesture, every glance. Judith Henley was a well-meaning nuisance at best. At worst, a prolific gossip who could unintentionally bury truth under rumour. Still, sometimes gossips revealed more than they realized. "Judith," Miss Marple said softly, "did you see Reverend Pritchard with Mrs. Dalrymple recently? Or did you merely hear it?" Judith hesitated, meaning she had heard it, not seen it. "Well," she conceded, "Mrs. Blackwell told me she witnessed them walking together, and Mrs. Blackwell is rarely wrong." Miss Marple smiled politely. "Mrs. Blackwell is also quite nearsighted." Judith blinked, momentarily deflated. "I suppose that's true." Eleanor put her cup down, her hands shaking. "Judith, please. Whoever my husband met or didn't meet is not your concern today." Judith flushed. "Of course, Eleanor. I'm so very sorry. I only wanted to... Well, never mind." She gave a clumsy curtsy of apology and tugged her dog back out the door. As soon as she left, the room fell still again. Eleanor let out a shaky exhale. People will say anything. And now they will say everything. Miss Marple reached out, taking her hand. "Eleanor, listen to me. Rumors are like ivy, persistent but rarely rooted in truth. Your husband was a man of integrity. Let us not allow idle tongues to tarnish his memory." Eleanor nodded, tears welling anew. "Thank you, though I fear the village will not be so kind." Miss Marple sat back, her expression thoughtful. The mention of Mrs. Dalrymple was important, not because Miss Marple believed scandal, but because someone wanted Eleanor upset. Someone wanted the village to talk. Someone benefited from confusion. And confusion was always a smokescreen for the guilty. Miss Marple spoke carefully. "Eleanor, did your husband mention Mrs. Dalrymple, even in passing?" Eleanor looked away. "Yes," she said softly, but only to say she needed help settling her late husband's affairs. He felt sorry for her. Miss Marple nodded. "Then that is all we shall take from it, for now." Another knock sounded at the door. Firmer this time, official. Miss Marple rose. "That will be the constable." Eleanor braced herself, swallowing her grief as though preparing for battle. Miss Marple opened the door. Constable Harrington stood there, pale and shaken, but composed. Behind him, Dr. Trent held his medical bag with both hands, his expression troubled. "Mrs. Pritchard," Harrington began, "Dr. Trent has examined the vicar." Dr. Trent cleared his throat. "It appears your husband did not slip or fall. There are signs, troubling signs, that suggest someone else was involved." Eleanor clutched the arm of a chair. "No, please, no." Harrington continued gravely. "We believe Reverend Pritchard was pushed." A cry escaped Eleanor. Miss Marple's gaze darkened, though her voice remained steady. "And the footprints?" The constable nodded slowly. "There were multiple sets, and one of them is quite large. A man's boot, deep imprints." Mrs. Pritchard looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Who would do such a thing? Who could?" Miss Marple laid a gentle hand on her shoulder, but her words were cold, precise, and full of quiet certainty. "That, my dear, is exactly what we shall find out." Listener, moment. What do you think the footprints reveal? A stranger? Someone from the parish? Someone the vicar trusted? Leave your theories. Each one might uncover a hidden truth. Chapter 5. Footprints, fabric, and the first cracks in the truth. Constable Harrington and Dr. Trent stepped inside the vicarage, bringing with them a gust of cold morning air that seemed to dim the room's warmth even further. Eleanor drew her shawl tighter around herself, her tears falling silently, steadily. Miss Marple rose with a calm a lesser soul might have mistaken for indifference, but her eyes, clear, sharp, and brimming with swift, precise calculations, flicked from the constable's expression to the doctor's trembling hands. Something troubled them, something beyond the simple fact of death. "Constable," Miss Marple said gently, "you mentioned footprints, multiple pairs." Harrington nodded stiffly. "Yes, Miss Marple, 3 sets." Eleanor's breath hitched. 3? 2 near the bank, Harrington clarified, and 1 set directly behind your husband's position. "Behind," Miss Marple repeated quietly, meaning close, very close. Harrington nodded grimly. "Too close." Dr. Trent stepped forward, adjusting his spectacles. "And his injuries are consistent with a fall caused by force. The angle of impact, the bruising. He did not simply tumble. He was propelled." Eleanor let out a soft moan of despair. No, he was a gentleman. Who would push him?" Miss Marple placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture gentle yet grounding. "Someone who wished to meet him, or someone who expected him." Harrington cleared his throat uncomfortably. And there's more. Miss Marple stiffened slightly. Go on. The constable reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small evidence envelope. Inside lay a fragment of deep navy cloth, torn, jagged at the edge. We found this caught on a nail at the bridge rail, fresh tear, right above where your husband fell. Miss Marple accepted the envelope, her gloved fingers carefully brushing its surface. She held the fabric to the light. The weave was tight, expensive, the kind used in well-tailored coats, not farmhands, not wandering strangers, not children playing in the woods. Someone who dressed well, someone with money, or pretensions of it. Did you notice any footprints leading away from the bridge? Miss Marple asked. Harrington hesitated. Yes, one set, the large boots, leading back toward the village. Quickly, by the spacing. Long strides. Miss Marple pressed her lips together, so the killer did not hide their flight. Dr. Trent looked shaken. This is madness. Murder here? In Briarwood? Who could be capable of such a thing? Miss Marple's voice was soft but firm. Even the quietest villages can harbor storms beneath their roofs, Doctor. Eleanor wiped her eyes. But Thomas did nothing to deserve this. Miss Marple crouched down beside her. Good people are not always safe from wicked plans, my dear. But sometimes they know things they weren't meant to discover. Eleanor stared at her. Do you think Thomas knew his killer? Miss Marple didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked, Eleanor, did your husband upset anyone of late, even in small ways? Eleanor hesitated. The moment stretched. Then she whispered, there was something. Miss Marple leaned closer. Tell us. Eleanor shuddered. Last week, Thursday, Thomas came home later than usual. His face was pale. I asked what happened, and he said it was parish business. And? Miss Marple encouraged. He said something wasn't right at the church accounts, something he needed to double-check. He didn't say more. He said he didn't want me to worry. Miss Marple's mind worked quickly. Church accounts, discrepancies, a man of integrity discovering wrongdoing. And today, an anonymous note, a dawn meeting, footprints of a man, a torn piece of a quality coat. A picture began to form, not complete, but with edges that hinted at shape. The constable turned pale. If someone was stealing from the church, Miss Marple nodded, then Reverend Pritchard, confronting them, would be dangerous indeed. At that moment, footsteps echoed outside, firm, purposeful. A second later, the door opened and Mr. Edwin Rourke, the church treasurer, stepped inside. He was tall, immaculately dressed, and known for his polished shoes and tailored coats. His coat today was navy blue, deep navy blue, exactly the shade of the torn scrap in Miss Marple's hand. He froze when he saw the constable, then Miss Marple, then Eleanor's tear-stained face. What's happened? He asked, voice strained. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. A hawk tracking the faintest shift in the wind. Mr. Rourke, she said softly, where were you this morning at first light? The room fell silent, so silent that one could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the creak of the wooden floor, even Eleanor's shallow breathing. Rourke swallowed. I was taking my morning walk. A walk? Miss Marple repeated. In the woods? His eyes flickered, the smallest, quickest movement. Yes, I often walk near the footbridge. Dr. Trent inhaled sharply. Harrington stiffened. Miss Marple stepped closer, her expression deceptively grandmotherly. How unfortunate, she said softly. that a piece of your coat appears to have been found there." Rourke's face drained of all colour. That's impossible." Miss Marple held up the evidence envelope. His eyes widened. Eleanor gasped in horror, but Miss Marple wasn't done. She spoke with sharp clarity, the kind that sliced through lies like a blade. "Mr. Rourke, I suggest you sit down, because this morning, beneath Briarwood Footbridge, Reverend Pritchard was found dead." Rourke swayed as though struck, and Miss Marple watched him, closely, discerningly, mercilessly, for the telltale signs. Shock? Guilt? Fear? Or all three? He grabbed the edge of a chair, steadying himself. This is terrible. Truly terrible. Thomas was my friend. How could this... Miss Marple interrupted gently. "Perhaps," she said, "you might tell us more about your morning walk?" Rourke's jaw clenched. He knew he was cornered. Not accused, not yet, but caught in the first web of inconsistencies that only a guilty or frightened man created. Miss Marple folded her hands calmly. "Because," she added quietly, "I do believe you saw something this morning, and you are very, very afraid to say what." Rourke stared at her, breathing hard. Then he whispered, "Miss Marple, I wasn't alone at the bridge." Eleanor gasped. Harrington stiffened. Dr. Trent stepped back. Miss Marple only leaned in. "Then," she said softly, "it is time you told us exactly who was with you." Listener, moment. Who do you think Rourke saw? Someone the vicar trusted? A stranger lurking in the woods? Or someone connected to the church accounts? Leave your theories. Chapter 6 will reveal more. Chapter 6. The Man in the Fog. For a long moment no one spoke. The room felt suspended in a hush so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. Mr. Rourke stood rigid, his polished shoes planted on the vicarage rug, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. His immaculate composure, the careful grooming, the crisp shirt collar, seemed to crack at the edges. Miss Marple watched him closely, not with hostility, not even with accusation, simply with the firm, unwavering gaze of a woman who saw the truth long before most people dared to. "Mr. Rourke," Miss Marple said softly, "take your time, but do speak plainly." Rourke swallowed, his throat bobbing. I didn't want to be involved," he whispered. "I thought if I stayed quiet, it would go away." Miss Marple's eyes glinted. "Troubles rarely disappear by being ignored. They usually grow teeth." Dr. Trent darted an anxious glance at Eleanor, who sat frozen in her chair, gripping a handkerchief in both trembling fists. Rourke exhaled shakily. "All right, I'll tell you. But you must believe me when I say I didn't harm Reverend Pritchard. I swear it." "That remains to be seen," Harrington muttered, but Miss Marple shot him a silencing glance. "Go on," she encouraged. Rourke drew in a deep breath. "This morning, very early, I went for my walk as usual. It clears my mind, helps me think through parish accounts before I meet the committee." Miss Marple's brows arched ever so slightly. "Of course." "I took the path toward the footbridge," Rourke continued. "It's quiet there, peaceful. But today, something was different." "How so?" Miss Marple asked. Rourke ran a hand across his forehead. "There was a man standing near the far end of the bridge." Eleanor gasped softly. Miss Marple remained perfectly still. "Describe him," she said. "I couldn't see his face well," Rourke admitted helplessly. The fog was thicker at the time, but he wore a heavy coat, dark, maybe black, and he stood very still, as if waiting. Miss Marple tilted her head. Waiting for whom? I don't know, Rourke cried, but when he noticed me, he stiffened, then turned his back. It felt intentional, as though he didn't want me to see him properly. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. And then? I crossed the bridge quickly, he said. Didn't say a word to him. Didn't want trouble. I kept thinking he might be some traveller lost in the woods. Miss Marple's voice dropped lower. Did you speak to Reverend Pritchard? I didn't see him, Rourke insisted. Not then. I swear it. Harrington stepped forward. But you were there when the vicar... Rourke whirled on him, eyes wide. No. When I crossed the bridge, the vicar wasn't there. Only the man. And when I reached the other side, I heard... something. The room leaned into his words. What did you hear? Miss Marple asked. A sound like... Rourke shuddered. A scuffle. Shoes scraping against wood, a thud. Something heavy hitting the embankment. Eleanor let out a strangled cry, her hands flying to her lips. And you didn't go back to look? Harrington demanded. Rourke blinked hard. I was afraid. The man, he had turned toward me then, just slightly. Enough for me to feel. He shook his head. Something was wrong about him. He wasn't startled or upset. He just stood there, watching. Miss Marple's gaze sharpened with quiet severity. You left, she said. Yes, Rourke whispered, ashamed. I hurried back toward the village. I didn't run. I didn't want to draw attention, but I walked as fast as I could. I kept looking over my shoulder. The man didn't follow. But the fog... He closed his eyes. It swallowed everything. Miss Marple exchanged a meaningful glance with Harrington. And what time was this? She asked. A little before 6:30. Miss Marple nodded slowly. And Reverend Pritchard, she murmured, was found around 7:15. Dr. Trent cleared his throat. The timing aligns with the likely window of death. Eleanor sobbed softly. Miss Marple rested a hand on her shoulder once more. Rourke turned toward her, his voice breaking. Mrs. Pritchard, I'm so sorry. I never imagined... But Eleanor's whisper cut him sharply. Why didn't you help him? Rourke froze, paling as if struck. I didn't know it was him, he stammered. I didn't know someone was being harmed. You heard something, Eleanor cried, her voice cracking. You heard someone fall. You saw a man standing there, and you left my husband alone. Rourke flinched. Tears welled in his eyes. I was afraid, he whispered. I didn't think... No, Eleanor said bitterly. You didn't. Miss Marple lifted a hand gently. Let us not forget. Grief sharpens the tongue, she said softly, and fear clouds judgment. Mr. Rourke's fear does not make him a murderer. Rourke sagged in relief, momentary relief, before Miss Marple added, but it does make him a witness, and a key one. Harrington straightened. I'll need to take your statement formally, Rourke, and you'll remain available for questioning. Rourke nodded weakly. Of course. But Miss Marple wasn't done. One last question, she said quietly. Your coat. Rourke blinked. My coat? Yes, Miss Marple said. Your coat, the navy one you're wearing today, is it new? Rourke looked down at his sleeve, confusion creasing his brow. No, I've had it for over a year. It's one of my favorites. Miss Marple nodded, eyes flicking to the torn scrap again. And was it in perfect condition when you put it on this morning? Rourke opened his mouth to answer, paused, frowned, then slowly touched the left sleeve near the elbow. His fingers felt a small tear, one he clearly hadn't noticed before. What? He breathed. Miss Marple's voice was calm, but deadly precise. That tear was not there yesterday. I saw you last evening after the church meeting. Your coat was intact." Rourke's knees buckled, and he sank into a chair. "What does this mean?" he whispered hoarsely. Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes unblinking, her voice soft as falling ash. "It means, Mr. Rourke, that you came very, very close to the killer this morning." The entire room froze, and in Eleanor's trembling gasp, in Harrington's stiffening posture, and in Dr. Trent's shocked exhale, the weight of Miss Marple's words settled like a shroud. The killer had brushed past Mr. Rourke. The killer had torn his coat. The killer had been there, inches away, hidden by fog, and now Miss Marple realized the killer knew that Mr. Rourke had seen him. Listener, moment, if you were the killer, would you worry now that a witness had seen you? Do you think the torn coat means the killer knew he brushed past Rourke? Or was it an accident that now exposes him? Share your theories. Chapter 7 is where the investigation turns sharply. Chapter 7. Secrets by the churchyard wall. The constable left with Mr. Rourke shortly afterward, guiding him toward the station to take a full statement. Dr. Trent lingered a moment longer, offering a stiff, sorrowful nod to Eleanor before stepping out into the thinning mist. The vicarage fell into a deeper, hollow quiet once the door closed, as if grief had settled into the very beams of the house. Eleanor sat motionless, her breath shallow, her eyes vacant. Miss Marple watched her silently for a moment, then gently placed a knitted blanket around her shoulders. "I shall not leave you alone," she said softly, "but I believe a moment in the fresh air may steady our minds. Would you allow me to step out for just a short while, only to keep the investigation moving?" Eleanor nodded weakly. Go where you must. I trust you." Miss Marple squeezed her hand. "I will return shortly. Rest now." She stepped outside, closing the vicarage door behind her, and took a slow breath. The village green was no longer quiet. Word had spread, just as she knew it would. People gathered in tight circles, whispering, faces pale with shock, lips pressed tight with fear. And in every cluster of villagers, Miss Marple noticed eyes turning toward the vicarage, toward the path leading to the footbridge, toward strangers and neighbors alike. Nothing stirred a small village quite like a murder. She walked steadily toward St. Aldwyn's church, boots clicking softly against the cobblestones. The churchyard was still empty, but it wouldn't remain so for long. Funerals brought large crowds, and this one would be unprecedented. Briarwood had lost its shepherd, and somewhere among the flock lurked a wolf. Miss Marple approached the old stone wall bordering the churchyard. Moss grew thick along its edges. Ivy curled up its side like green lace. The fog had lifted enough that the carved gravestones beyond were faintly visible. That was when she noticed movement. A figure standing alone behind the church, half shadowed by the tower. Tall, still, nervous. Miss Marple recognized him instantly, Samuel Carter, the church's young caretaker. He was a quiet man in his late 20s, soft-spoken and earnest, always carrying tools or oil cans, always ready to patch a tile or repair a bench. He had admired Reverend Pritchard deeply. His loyalty to the vicar had been unquestioned. But now, he looked rattled, haunted. His hands were shoved deep into his coat pockets, shoulders rigid, as if bracing himself against unseen winds. Miss Marple approached with gentle steps. "Mr. Carter?" she called softly. He jolted, spinning around. His face was pale, eyes wide with something between fear and guilt. Miss Marple, he said quickly, I didn't see you. You seem troubled, my dear boy. He swallowed, gaze darting toward the path leading to the footbridge. I suppose everyone is after what happened? Miss Marple stepped closer. You were fond of Reverend Pritchard? His eyes glistened. He was like a father to me, gave me my first proper job, trusted me with the church keys. Keys, responsibility, access to everything. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. I know this must be very hard for you. Samuel's voice cracked. Hard? Miss Marple? I can't believe he's gone. He scrubbed a trembling hand across his cheek. I keep thinking he'll walk out from behind the vestry with a list of repairs or a hymn suggestion. Miss Marple watched him carefully. The grief was real, but something else lay beneath it. Something heavier. Samuel, she said gently, were you near the footbridge this morning? His entire body tensed. The reaction was immediate. Too immediate. I'm here every morning, he stammered, opening the church, sweeping the walkways. Miss Marple tilted her head slightly. I asked, she said softly, if you were near the footbridge. His lips parted. He hesitated. A long silence stretched between them, long enough that even the birds seemed to quiet. Finally he whispered, Yes. Miss Marple waited. I was there, but not at sunrise, Samuel went on quickly. Around 7. He swallowed hard. I saw the constable and Dr. Trent heading that way, so I followed. And then I saw... His voice failed. Miss Marple touched his arm. Finding him like that must have been dreadful. It was, he choked. I wish I could unsee it. Miss Marple nodded slowly, her expression gentle, but her mind worked at lightning speed. Samuel, she continued softly, may I ask you something else? You were close to Reverend Pritchard. Did he confide in you recently? Anything unusual? Samuel's jaw clenched. He looked away, toward the church doors, toward the graveyard, anywhere but Miss Marple's eyes. Then he answered, barely audible, Yes. Miss Marple's heart quickened. What did he tell you? Samuel hesitated, then dropped his voice. He said the church accounts were off. Miss Marple's breath stilled. He told you that? She asked. Samuel nodded. 2 nights ago, he asked if I'd noticed anyone using the vestry office late, or anyone near the locked ledger cabinet. Miss Marple exchanged this new information with her internal ledger of clues. And had you? She asked. Samuel hesitated. I didn't want to say. I didn't want to accuse anyone wrongly. But you did notice someone? Samuel nodded again. His voice was barely a whisper now. Yes. Miss Marple tried not to show the shift in her heartbeat. Who was it, Samuel? He closed his eyes. The same person Reverend Pritchard asked me to look out for. Miss Marple's voice lowered. And that is? Samuel finally looked up, fear flickering in his eyes. Mrs. Dalrymple. Miss Marple froze. Her fingers tightened around her handbag. Mrs. Dalrymple, the lovely young widow the neighborhood gossips whispered about, the one rumored to seek guidance from the vicar, the one Judith Henley had eagerly mentioned. Miss Marple measured Samuel's trembling voice. What was she doing in the vestry? Miss Marple asked. Samuel looked down at his hands. I don't know, he whispered, but I saw her with the ledger room keys. Miss Marple inhaled sharply. This was no small matter. Church ledger keys were kept locked. Only trusted individuals had access. Samuel, the vicar, and the treasurer. For Mrs. Dalrymple to have them. Miss Marple felt a cold certainty begin to thread itself through her thoughts. Eleanor's earlier fear, the church accounts, the anonymous note, the dawn meeting, the man in the fog, the torn coat, the ledger room. Piece by piece the puzzle was forming shape, not yet complete, but the edges, the edges were becoming sharp. She steadied her voice. "Samuel, you must tell Constable Harrington what you've told me." He paled. "Will I be suspected? Will they think I—" "No," Miss Marple said firmly, "but a murder has taken place, and you hold a truth the constable needs." Samuel took a shuddering breath and nodded. Miss Marple touched his arm with surprising strength. "Courage, Samuel. Secrets fester in silence, but truth, once spoken, has a way of clearing fog, real and otherwise." He met her eyes, desperation melting into a fragile kind of resolve. "I'll tell him," he whispered. Miss Marple offered a small, approving nod and turned to walk back toward the village. As she stepped away, her mind whirred. Mrs. Dalrymple had the keys. Rourke had seen a man. The vicar had uncovered something in the accounts. And somewhere in all this, Miss Marple knew. The killer was watching, listening, waiting for one mistake. She lifted her chin, determination steel hard behind her soft demeanor. Let them watch. Let them listen. She had solved darker puzzles than this. And now, truly, the hunt had begun. Listener, moment. What do you think Mrs. Dalrymple is hiding? Money trouble? A personal secret with the vicar? Or something connected to the church ledgers? Your guesses may just be right. Chapter 8 digs deep into hidden motives. Chapter 8, The Widow of Rosebank Lane. The village of Briarwood moved with uneasy quiet as Miss Marple made her way toward Rosebank Lane. Doors that were usually open remained only slightly ajar. Curtains twitched. Whispers followed her footsteps like shadows. The kind people pretended not to speak, but couldn't help letting slip. Mrs. Dalrymple, the vicar, the footbridge. By the time Miss Marple reached the bend in the lane, she could feel the thrum of quiet speculation hanging thick in the air. Rosebank Lane was a charming stretch of cottages draped in wisteria and climbing ivy. At the very end stood Lilac Cottage, its pale purple shutters bright against the morning gloom. A pair of well-tended rose bushes flanked the path leading to the door. It looked innocent enough, but Miss Marple knew better than anyone. Evil rarely chooses ugly surroundings. She approached the front step and lifted her gloved hand to knock. Before her knuckles touched the wood, the door opened. Mrs. Clara Dalrymple stood framed in the doorway, her beauty delicate and refined. Dark curls pinned neatly, soft brown eyes shimmering with what might have been grief, or something else entirely. She wore a lavender dress with a lace collar, her demeanor gentle, almost fragile. "Miss Marple," she said breathlessly, I heard the news. The vicar, dear God, it can't be true." Tears brimmed in her lashes, tremulous and carefully placed. Miss Marple gave her a thin, polite smile. "Yes, my dear, I'm afraid it is." Clara pressed a hand to her chest. "He was such a kind man. I don't understand how something so horrible could happen." Miss Marple studied her. Every blink, every tremble, every delicate exhale. "May I come in?" she asked. "Of course," Clara said at once, stepping aside eagerly, too eagerly. Miss Marple entered. Lilac Cottage was warm, tastefully decorated with floral prints, lace doilies, porcelain figurines, soft, innocent touches in every corner. And yet, something felt vaguely out of place. Miss Marple glanced around. "You keep a lovely home," she said. Clara let out a shy, flustered laugh. "Oh, thank you. I do my best. It helps distract me, especially since my husband passed." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "Grief is a heavy companion, but I imagine Reverend Pritchard was a comfort to you?" Clara's expression softened. "He was. He helped me sort through my late husband's accounts. He prayed with me. He listened." She lowered her eyes modestly. "He truly cared." Miss Marple's tone remained mild. "And did he visit you often?" Clara blinked. "Only occasionally, when I needed counsel." "Oh? And did you need counsel often?" Clara hesitated, the smallest flicker. "Not excessively. Only when matters became complicated." "Financial matters?" Miss Marple asked casually. Clara's eyes lifted sharply, then softened deliberately. "Yes, financial matters," she said. "My husband left a rather tangled estate." Miss Marple made a sympathetic cluck of her tongue. "Debts?" Clara stiffened. "Some." "And trouble with the church accounts?" Clara froze entirely, just for half a second. But Miss Marple saw it. Oh, she saw it? "My husband had nothing to do with the church accounts," Clara said quickly, almost sharply, before catching herself. "I mean, I don't know anything about such things." Miss Marple smiled gently, the kind smile her knitting circle would mistake for forgetfulness, but which actually preceded the unravelling of knots. "My dear, I did not ask about your husband," she said softly. "I asked about you." Clara's cheeks drained of colour. I don't know what you mean," she whispered. Miss Marple's gaze drifted across the room, landing on a small table near the window. A set of keys lay neatly arranged, keys with distinctive brass labels. L Cottage Garden Shed Back Gate, and one with a thin white ribbon tied through the loop, a ribbon identical to those used to label the vestry keys. Miss Marple walked toward them. Clara stepped forward quickly. "Miss Marple, those aren't—" "Mrs. Dalrymple," Miss Marple interrupted gently, picking up the ribboned key. "You dropped this 2 nights ago." Clara's eyes widened with naked fear. "You were seen," Miss Marple added softly, "at the church, near the ledger room." Clara shook her head violently. "No, you're mistaken. I never—" But Miss Marple set the key down and turned to her, voice calm and unwavering. "Mrs. Dalrymple, this key opens the ledger cabinet." Clara's face went white. I can explain," she whispered, voice thin as paper. Miss Marple did not press. She simply folded her hands and waited. And people always spoke eventually. "I didn't steal anything," Clara burst out suddenly. "I only wanted to know if the church owed my late husband money. He lent funds a long time ago, and I never saw them returned. I was desperate after his death, Miss Marple. I didn't know who to ask." Miss Marple watched her intently, a tangled answer, but parts of it rang true. "Why not ask the vicar?" Miss Marple said quietly. Clara's eyes glistened. "I did, but he wanted to review the ledgers first. He said he couldn't answer without checking several entries in detail. He told me to give him time." "And did he find anything unusual?" Clara hesitated, then nodded faintly. "I think so," she whispered. "He seemed troubled. He said he would speak to me again this week." Miss Marple leaned slightly closer. "Did he say why he was troubled?" Clara shook her head. "He said something didn't add up. He didn't elaborate." Miss Marple narrowed her eyes slightly. "And Mrs. Dalrymple, did he send you a note this morning?" Clara looked startled. "A note? No, of course not. Why would he?" Miss Marple studied her carefully. Every blink, every shoulder movement, every tremble. This was not the face of a woman who had received an anonymous summons. But was she the type to send one? Possibly. "I must ask you something else," Miss Marple said softly. "Were you at Briarwood Footbridge this morning?" Clara shook her head instantly. "No, I was here. I didn't leave the house." Miss Marple did not reply. She simply looked and listened. Clara swallowed heavily. "I swear I wasn't at the bridge." A pause, a tremor, a truth half hidden. But Miss Marple smelled guilt. Not guilt of murder, some other guilt. Financial misdeeds, perhaps? Sneaking into the ledger room? Certainly. But murder? Miss Marple watched closely. When Clara lied, her eyes darted left. When she worried, her fingers tightened around the lace of her collar. When she mentioned the vicar helping her expression softened with something like genuine gratitude. But when Miss Marple mentioned the man on the bridge, Clara's face betrayed only confusion, not fear of recognition. Interesting. "Mrs. Dalrymple," Miss Marple said kindly, "I do not believe you killed Reverend Pritchard." Clara collapsed into a chair, sobbing in relief. "Oh, thank God. I was terrified you'd think—" Miss Marple held up a hand. "But I do believe someone wants us to think you had a reason." Clara froze. "A reason?" she whispered. "Yes," Miss Marple said softly. "You were in the ledger room. You had the keys. You were seeking money. And you visited the vicar privately." "That doesn't mean—" "No," Miss Marple agreed. "It doesn't mean guilt, but it means motive. And someone is using that motive as a misdirection." Clara stared at her helplessly. "Someone," Miss Marple continued, "who set a trap this morning. A trap designed to lure the vicar to the footbridge. A trap built from secrecy and knowledge of his kindness." Clara trembled. "Who would do that?" Miss Marple looked toward the window, toward the path that led back to the green. "Someone who feared discovery," she said softly. "Someone who needed the vicar alone." Clara whispered, "Miss Marple, do you know who it is?" Miss Marple gave her a small, enigmatic smile, the kind she rarely gave before her theories were more than theories. "I know," she said, "that the man Mr. Rourke saw in the fog was not you." Clara let out a shaky exhale. "And I know," Miss Marple added quietly, "that the killer is a man." Clara's breath hitched. How can you be sure?" Miss Marple's voice lowered to a precise whisper. "Because the footprints leading away from the bridge were large, deep, confident, and belonged to someone accustomed to walking in boots heavier than any a woman would wear." Clara's eyes widened. "Then, who?" Miss Marple picked up her handbag, fastening the clasp. "That," she said, "is what I shall find out next." And with the soft click of the clasp, the chapter closed on Lilac Cottage, while the killer, somewhere in Briarwood, began to sense that Miss Marple was getting close, very close. Listener, moment Miss Marple now knows the killer is a man and that Mrs. Dalrymple is being used as a decoy. Who do you suspect? The treasurer, Mr. Rourke? The caretaker, Samuel? Someone not yet revealed? Chapter 9 will crack everything open. Chapter 9. The ledger, the lies, and the man who ran Miss Marple left Lilac Cottage with a mind sharpened like a needle. The air outside was cooler now, stirred by a faint wind that rustled the hedges along Rosebank Lane. Each step she took seemed to echo the rhythm of the village's collective heartbeat, quickened, trembling, fraught with unease. She headed straight for St. Aldwyn's church. If someone had manipulated the vicar into a dawn meeting, the truth would lie where the vicar himself last sought answers: the ledger room. The church stood solemn and grey against the horizon, its bell tower casting long shadows across the courtyard stones. Miss Marple entered quietly, closing the wooden door behind her. The interior smelled of beeswax polish and lilies, the remnants of last Sunday's service. She walked toward the vestry corridor, where the ledger room sat tucked away behind a narrow arch. Halfway there, she stopped. Someone had already been inside. The vestry door hung slightly ajar, something Reverend Pritchard would never have permitted. He was a man of meticulous habits. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. She approached silently, pushing the door open with a slow, cautious hand. The room was small, lined with shelves of hymnals, candle boxes, and church records. The heavy iron-bound ledger cabinet stood against the far wall, and it was unlocked. The lock hung open. A key lay beside it, the same type Samuel had seen in Mrs. Dalrymple's hand, but now used again. Miss Marple stepped inside, inspecting the room with the precision of someone counting threads on a tapestry. A ledger, thick, heavy, and bound in dark leather, lay open on the desk. She bent over it. Columns of handwritten entries filled the pages: donations, expenditures, maintenance costs, parish events. And then she saw it. A series of recent entries written in a rushed, unfamiliar hand. Amounts larger than usual, withdrawals vague in description. And then a sudden gap. Miss Marple frowned. A page had been torn out, not removed neatly, torn, the fibres still ragged at the edges. She slid her gloved fingers along the gap. The page had been taken very recently. Someone had come into this room after Reverend Pritchard's death to steal evidence. She closed the ledger gently, as though comforting a wounded creature. "Poor man," she murmured. "He found something he was never meant to see." A soft, scuffing sound behind her made her turn. Samuel stood in the doorway, shoulders slumped, eyes filled with dread. "Miss Marple," he whispered, "I saw you come inside. Is something wrong?" Miss Marple regarded him carefully. The young caretaker's face was pale, but not calculating. He was shaken, deeply human. "Samuel," she said gently, "did you enter the ledger room today?" He shook his head quickly. "No, I haven't been near it since last night." Miss Marple nodded. That was consistent. His innocence was beginning to feel solid, fragile, but solid. "Come in, dear. I want you to see something." Samuel stepped closer, eyeing the torn ledger page with confusion. "Was that like this earlier?" he asked. "No," Miss Marple replied. "Someone came to steal it." Samuel's face blanched. Who would do that?" Miss Marple closed the ledger with a soft thud. "The same man who tore Mr. Rourke's coat when fleeing the bridge." Samuel swallowed. "You think the killer came here?" "I am certain of it." She stepped past Samuel, walking into the vestry itself. The floor bore faint marks, boot scuffs, dust disturbed, and near the corner, Miss Marple paused. A small, crushed petal, purple, lilac. Her eyes narrowed. Someone had brushed past a lilac bush this morning, recently, and carried the scent and petals with them. But Clara Dalrymple's cottage was called Lilac Cottage for a reason. Flowers grew in abundance, spilling over the front walk. Had Clara's garden brushed against someone leaving her house? Or had someone come from the cottage before going to the church? Miss Marple pocketed the petal, stepping briskly outside. "Samuel," she said, "fetch Constable Harrington immediately. Tell him it concerns the ledger." Samuel nodded and ran off without hesitation. Miss Marple turned toward the village green. She had one more stop, and it was not Lilac Cottage. It was the vicarage. Eleanor needed to know what had been stolen. But more importantly, Miss Marple needed access to the vicar's personal study. She crossed the green swiftly, lifting her skirt slightly to avoid the damp grass. When she reached the vicarage, Eleanor opened the door before she could knock. Her eyes were swollen, her face drained, but she stood with quiet dignity. "Miss Marple," she whispered, "you're back." "I am," Miss Marple said softly, "and I must ask something delicate." Eleanor braced herself. "Ask anything." Miss Marple nodded, her voice gentle but firm. "Did Reverend Pritchard keep personal notes about the church accounts? Something he wouldn't place in the official ledger?" Eleanor blinked, thinking. Then something flitted across her expression, a spark of memory. "Yes," she whispered. "He kept a small notebook. He used it for private reminders. Sometimes for concerns he hadn't yet confirmed." Miss Marple's eyes brightened. "Do you know where he kept it?" Eleanor nodded faintly. "In his desk drawer, the one with the small brass handle. He said it was safer there." Miss Marple felt her heart quicken. They hurried to the study together. The desk sat undisturbed, Reverend Pritchard's spectacles still resting beside a stack of sermons he would never finish. Eleanor pulled the brass-handled drawer open and gasped. The notebook was there, but it had been opened, pages pulled apart. One page was missing. Eleanor stepped back, hand to her mouth. "Oh no, they found it. Someone was in this house." Miss Marple touched the torn edges of the notebook with a steady hand. "Not someone," she said quietly. "Someone with a key. Someone trusted. Someone who could enter without suspicion." Eleanor trembled. "You think the killer came inside?" Miss Marple nodded. "And they took the one page that could condemn them." Eleanor burst into tears. Who would do such a thing? Who could betray him like this? Miss Marple didn't answer immediately, because she was no longer asking who could, only who did. And the answer was becoming clearer with every passing moment. A man with access, a man in the fog, a man whose coat had been torn, a man the vicar confronted over the accounts, a man who returned to steal evidence from both the ledger room and this study. Miss Marple stood slowly and spoke with the quiet finality of someone who had just placed the last piece of a puzzle. "The killer," she said, "is hiding in plain sight." Eleanor looked at her with trembling desperation. "Miss Marple, who is it?" Miss Marple took a slow breath. "I must confirm one last detail," she whispered. "Then I will tell you." Outside, footsteps hurried toward the vicarage. Constable Harrington's voice echoed, "Miss Marple, we found something." Miss Marple straightened her shoulders. Her hunt was nearly over. Listener, moment. Who do you think Miss Marple is closing in on? A respected man with access? Someone tied to the finances? Or the mysterious man Rourke feared in the fog? Chapter 10, the final reveal, will solve the murder beneath the Briarwood Footbridge. Chapter 10, truth beneath the footbridge. Constable Harrington hurried up the vicarage path, breathless and pale, a folded handkerchief clutched tightly in his hand. Behind him trailed Samuel, equally shaken. "Miss Marple," Harrington called, panting slightly. "You'll want to see this." Miss Marple stepped outside with Eleanor beside her, the widow trembling but resolute. Harrington extended the handkerchief toward her. Inside it lay something small, metallic, familiar. A button, large, brass, embossed with a subtle crest. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened with instant recognition. "I know this button," she murmured. "So did I," Harrington said. "One of my constables found it snagged on a branch near the footbridge, freshly torn off." Eleanor leaned closer, confusion wrinkling her brow. "A button? From whose clothing?" Harrington swallowed. "That's just the thing," he said quietly. "It belongs to a very expensive coat, Miss Marple." Miss Marple nodded. "And only one man in Briarwood owns a coat adorned with these brass buttons?" Harrington turned to Samuel. "Fetch him." Samuel nodded and sprinted toward the green. Eleanor clutched Miss Marple's arm. "Who does it belong to?" Miss Marple exhaled slowly, not from surprise, but from the weight of confirmation. "The treasurer," she said quietly. "Mr. Edwin Rourke." Eleanor's gasp echoed across the vicarage garden. But he said he was a witness, that he saw a man." "Yes," Miss Marple said softly. "He did see a man in the fog, but not a stranger. He saw himself reflected in guilt and crafted a tale before fear gave him away." Eleanor's hand trembled. How do you know?" Miss Marple stood straighter, her voice taking on a calm, authoritative rhythm, the sound of a mind laying out the full truth, like cards on a table. How Miss Marple solved the murder. 1. The torn scrap of navy fabric, Miss Marple lifted the evidence envelope Rourke had left behind earlier. Inside was the earlier piece of fabric found near the railing. "Mr. Rourke's coat is navy wool," Miss Marple explained. "Torn this morning. He thought it happened when he brushed past foliage, but it was torn when he struggled with Reverend Pritchard." Eleanor's breath hitched. 2. The button with the crest. Miss Marple held up the brass button. "Rourke's coat has distinctive brass buttons. Custom made. Imported from London. This one came from the sleeve." She tapped the button in the handkerchief. "And it was torn during the confrontation." 3. His supposed morning walk. Miss Marple shook her head gently. "Rourke does not take morning walks. He is notoriously late rising. The butcher told me he delivers Rourke's bread at 7:30 every morning, and Rourke always answers in his dressing gown." Harrington nodded, confirming the detail. 4. His fear of the man in the fog. "Fear can be genuine," Miss Marple said, "and Rourke was afraid, but not of a man he saw." A pause. "He was afraid of being seen." 5. The missing ledger page and the notebook page. Someone stole evidence from both the ledger room and the vicar's private notebook. Only a man with access, confidence, and a sense of entitlement would risk breaking into 2 places within a few hours. Miss Marple looked toward the church tower. Rourke had full access as treasurer. 6. The financial motive. Miss Marple opened the ledger she carried. Rourke was siphoning funds, small amounts at first, then larger sums as he grew bolder. Reverend Pritchard discovered discrepancies and intended to confront him. She closed the ledger. Last night, the vicar confided in Samuel, planning to speak with Rourke today. Rourke knew the truth was closing in. Eleanor whispered, "So Rourke sent the note?" "Yes," Miss Marple said. "He typed it, delivered it by hand, and arrived early at the bridge to silence the man who would expose him." The confrontation footsteps thundered toward them. Samuel returned with Rourke in tow, the treasurer pale, breathless, and visibly cornered. Harrington seized his arm the moment he reached the garden. "What is the meaning of this?" Rourke demanded, trying to wrench free. "Why have I been dragged?" Miss Marple held up the brass button. His face fell, all colour drained away. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not—" Miss Marple's voice cut through him like a blade. "You tore your coat on the footbridge railing as you pushed Reverend Pritchard." Rourke shook his head violently. "No, he slipped, he confronted you," Miss Marple continued, "about the missing money. You panicked. You shoved him, harder than you meant to. He fell down the embankment and struck his head." Rourke staggered backward, breath ragged. "It was an accident. He lost his balance." Miss Marple stepped closer, her tone unyielding. "Then why did you return to steal the ledger page and the vicar's notebook page? Why did you follow your crime with another?" Rourke froze. His chest rose and fell rapidly. "I was ruined," he whispered. "The accounts, the shortages, they'd blame me. He wouldn't have understood. Nobody would." Miss Marple's eyes glimmered with sadness, not cruelty. "So you—" silenced him. Rourke trembled violently, then collapsed to his knees, tears spilling onto the garden stones. "I didn't mean to kill him," he sobbed. "He was my friend. I only wanted him to stop asking questions." Constable Harrington stepped forward, placing him in cuffs with surprising gentleness. "Edwin Rourke, you are under arrest for the murder of Reverend Thomas Pritchard." Rourke bowed his head, defeated. "Tell Eleanor," he managed between sobs, "that I'm sorry." But Eleanor had already turned away, silent, devastated, supported by Miss Marple's steady hand. Aftermath. Hours later, once Rourke had been taken away and the village had quieted again, Eleanor sat with Miss Marple in the vicarage garden, the afternoon sun casting soft rays through the leaves. "I don't know how to thank you," Eleanor whispered. "Without you, the truth might have been buried forever." Miss Marple smiled gently, her eyes kind. "My dear, you mustn't thank me. I only follow human nature. The patterns of fear, guilt, greed, and kindness are rarely new. One must simply look closely." Eleanor squeezed her hand. "Will it ever stop hurting?" Miss Marple looked at the horizon, the Briarwood Footbridge just barely visible through the trees. "In time," she said softly. "Love does not leave us, only changes its form." A breeze rustled the branches. The mystery was over, but Miss Marple knew the world was full of quiet crimes hidden beneath polite smiles, and she would always, always be there to reveal them. Video outro for your 1+ hour Miss Marple mystery. Thank you for listening to Murder Beneath the Briarwood Footbridge, a Miss Marple mystery. If you enjoyed the story, share your theories in the comments. Which clue did you notice first? Like the video to support the channel, subscribe for more. Miss Marple mysteries every week until our next case. Stay observant, stay curious. And remember, every small village hides big secrets.